liked the play, liked me, and then a year later they're casting Married with Children, and they can't get the Bundy guy.
Ed O'Neill just broke decades of silence about Married with Children, and what he revealed changed everything fans thought they knew about the show. For 11 seasons, Al Bundy became one of television's most iconic characters, but behind the scenes, there were casting disasters, bitter feuds, and secrets that never made it to the tabloids. Ed has finally opened up about the uncomfortable truths most viewers never figured out. The real reason 2 cast members were fired after the pilot. The scene he absolutely refused to film. Why he and Amanda Beers didn't speak for years. And the one thing about playing Al Bundy that he still regrets today. This isn't another generic behind-the-scenes fluff piece. These are revelations straight from Ed himself, admitting mistakes, exposing tensions, and explaining why a show like Married with Children could never survive in today's television landscape. If you grew up watching the Bundys or discovered them through streaming, what you're about to hear will completely reframe how you see Al Bundy, the cast dynamics, and the legacy of one of TV's most controversial sitcoms. Let's get into what Ed O'Neill finally admitted after all these years. When Ed O'Neill walked into that audition room in 1986, he wasn't the favorite. Fox had other actors in mind. Bigger names who seemed like safer bets for a show that was already pushing boundaries. But Ed did something that changed everything. He slumped into a chair, let out a defeated sigh, and embodied a man who had given up on life, but somehow kept going. That gesture, borrowed from watching his own relatives, instantly convinced creators Michael Moy and Ron Levitt that Al Bundy had arrived. What most fans don't know is how close Ed came to losing the role even after that audition. Network executives worried he was too unknown, too risky for a show that needed to compete with established sitcoms on ABC, CBS, and NBC. Fox was still finding its identity, and betting on an unproven actor felt dangerous. Ed later admitted he thought he'd blown it when weeks passed without a callback. But the creators fought for him. They insisted that Ed's authenticity, that weary defiance mixed with dark humor, was irreplaceable. When Fox finally greenlit the casting, Ed was in, but the pressure was immediate. He wasn't just playing a character, he was carrying an entire show's concept on his shoulders. And if it failed, his career would take a hit. The weight of that responsibility shaped how Ed approached Al Bundy from day one. He studied the script obsessively, added his own touches, and made sure every defeated sigh and sarcastic quip felt real. Unlike sitcom dads who delivered punchlines with a wink, Ed played Al straight, as if this was a man genuinely trapped in a life he didn't choose. That commitment is what made audiences believe in Al Bundy, even when they hated him. But what Ed won't tell you is how that intensity created tension with other cast members almost immediately, and that friction would define the show's entire run. Most people assume the Married with Children pilot introduced the cast we all remember, but that's not true. Kelly and Bud Bundy were originally played by different actors, Tina Caspary and Hunter Carson, and after filming wrapped, Fox made a brutal decision. They fired both of them. Ed O'Neill recently revealed just how awkward and uncomfortable that situation was, admitting that even during the pilot shoot, something felt off about the family dynamic. Tina Caspary's Kelly lacked the specific energy the creators wanted. They needed someone who could play dumb without being cartoonish, someone who could deliver sexual innuendo while still maintaining a strange innocence. Tina didn't quite hit that balance. Christina Applegate, only 15 years old, came in for a second audition and nailed it instantly. Ed said the moment Christina read her first line, the room knew they'd found Kelly. Hunter Carson's Bud had a similar problem. The character needed to be both pathetic and confident, a kid constantly failing with girls but never losing his delusional self-belief. Hunter couldn't capture that contradiction. David Faustino, just 12 at the time, brought a sharpness and comedic timing that made Bud feel real. Ed admitted that working with David immediately felt easier, more natural. But here's what Ed revealed that shocked people. The decision to replace both kids wasn't just about talent. it was about chemistry with him specifically. Fox executives told the creators that if Ed was going to carry the show as Al Bundy, the family needed to feel believable around him. Tina and Hunter didn't fit that dynamic, and the network wasn't willing to compromise. Ed confessed he felt guilty about both actors losing their jobs, especially since they'd already filmed the pilot and thought they were part of something permanent. But he also admitted that once Christina and David joined, the show finally clicked. The Bundy family felt like a real dysfunctional unit, and that authenticity became the foundation of everything that followed. What Ed didn't expect was how quickly that chemistry would be tested by the pressures of live studio audiences and the chaos that came with filming weekly episodes in front of hundreds of strangers. Performing in front of a live studio audience sounds exciting until you're doing it every single week for 11 years. Ed O'Neill recently opened up about the relentless pressure of filming Married with Children in front of 300 to 500 people per episode, admitting it was far more stressful than most fans realize. Unlike shows filmed without audiences or with laugh tracks added later, every joke, every physical gag, every line delivery had to land in real time. If something didn't work, everyone knew immediately. Ed described the atmosphere as electric but unforgiving. When a joke was killed, the energy in the room was incredible. But when a scene fell flat, the silence was crushing. He said there were nights when he could feel the audience losing interest, and the cast had to improvise or push harder to win them back. That constant need to perform at full intensity took a toll, especially during the show's later seasons when the material became more repetitive. One of the things Ed revealed that fans never figured out is how many takes certain scenes required because of audience reactions. If the crowd laughed too long, it threw off the timing. If they didn't laugh at all, the director would call for another take to adjust the delivery. Ed said some episodes took twice as long to film because they were chasing the perfect audience response, and by the end of the night, everyone was exhausted. Physical comedy was especially brutal. Ed performed countless pratfalls, fake punches, and slapstick gags that looked effortless on screen, but left him with real bruises and aches. He admitted that doing a shoe store scene where Al had to wrestle with oversized women's feet or collapse in exhaustion wasn't just acting. By season 5, his back was genuinely hurting, and he had to push through the pain to keep the laughs coming. Ed also confessed that the live audience sometimes made things uncomfortable. There were moments when jokes crossed lines, and he could feel the tension in the room. Other times, the crowd laughed at things that weren't supposed to be funny, which forced the cast to adjust their performances mid-scene. Katie Sagal once told him she hated filming certain Peg Bundy moments in front of live audiences because the character's laziness and sexual teasing felt more exposed with real people watching. Despite all the stress, Ed admitted the live audience was also what made the show special. The immediacy, the unpredictability, the raw reactions, it all added an energy that couldn't be faked. But he also said if he had to do it again, he's not sure his body could handle it. The grind of live performance week after week for over a decade was something most fans never fully appreciated, and it's part of why Ed looks back on the show with both pride and exhaustion. One of the most bitter revelations Ed O'Neill has made in recent years involves his relationship with Amanda Beers, who played Marcy Rhodes. For decades, fans speculated about tension between them, but Ed finally confirmed the truth. They had a serious falling out that lasted years, and it started with something that seemed small but cut deep. In 1989, TV Guide released a special cover featuring the Married with Children cast, but only Ed and Katie Sagal appeared. Amanda Beers and David Garrison, who played Steve Rhodes, were completely excluded. Ed admitted he knew about the cover before it came out and said nothing. At the time, he didn't think it was a big deal. He was the lead, Katie was his co-star, and in his mind, that's just how the industry worked. But Amanda was furious. She felt disrespected and undervalued, like her contribution to the show didn't matter. Ed said he should have spoken up to defend her and David, but he stayed silent, and that decision created a rift that never fully healed. The situation got worse in 1993 when Amanda got married and didn't invite Ed to the wedding. She later explained it was a difficult choice, but she believed his presence would make some guests uncomfortable given their strained relationship. Ed took it as a personal insult. He admitted in interviews that he was angry and hurt, feeling like Amanda had publicly declared their working relationship was purely professional with no personal connection. For years afterward, they barely spoke unless the script required it. Ed said their scenes together became awkward, filled with unspoken tension that the rest of the cast could feel. Katie Sagal tried to mediate at one point, but both Ed and Amanda were too stubborn to budge. Christina Applegate recalled feeling caught in the middle, unsure how to navigate the dynamic without making things worse. Ed recently admitted he regrets how he handled the entire situation. He said his ego got in the way, and he should have been more aware of how Amanda felt as a supporting cast member on a show where he was clearly the star. He acknowledged that the TV Guide cover was a slight, even if unintentional, and his silence made it worse. In 2025, Amanda appeared at a fan convention and was asked about the feud. She said time had softened her feelings, but she still wished Ed had stood up for the entire cast back then. Ed, for his part, has said he'd apologize if given the chance, though it's unclear if they've actually spoken privately. What's certain is that this conflict shaped the show's behind-the-scenes atmosphere far more than most fans ever realized. And it's a reminder that even iconic TV families can have very real, very messy relationships off-screen. Ed O'Neill has always been known for committing fully to his roles, but even he had limits. For years, fans wondered if there were any scenes or storylines he refused to film during Married with Children's 11-season run. Ed finally revealed the truth. There was one episode where he pushed back hard, and it almost caused a major conflict with the writers and producers. The scene involved Al Bundy doing something Ed felt crossed a line, not just for the character, but for what he was willing to portray on television. Ed didn't specify the exact episode, but he hinted it involved a storyline that made Al look genuinely cruel, rather than just pathetically funny. The writers wanted to push the envelope, which was standard for the show, but Ed argued that making Al truly malicious would destroy the character's core appeal. Al was supposed to be a loser, not a villain. Audiences could laugh at his failures and frustrations, because underneath it all, he was just a beaten-down man trying to survive. The writers initially resisted. They felt Ed was being overly cautious, and that the show's reputation depended on constantly pushing boundaries. But Ed stood firm. He told them if they forced the scene, it would feel wrong, and viewers would turn on Al permanently. After tense discussions, the writers agreed to rework the episode, softening the scene while keeping the edge that made Married with Children what it was. Ed admitted this wasn't the only time he clashed with the creative team, but it was the most significant. He said there were other moments where he questioned dialogue or physical gags, especially as the show went on and the humor became more repetitive. By season 8 or 9, some scripts felt like they were recycling the same jokes, and Ed had to find ways to make them feel fresh without just going through the motions. What Ed revealed that surprised people is how much control he actually had over Al Bundy's character. Unlike some sitcom stars who simply read the script as written, Ed actively shaped how Al was portrayed. He added mannerisms, changed line deliveries, and sometimes ad-libbed entire moments that became iconic. The writers trusted him because he understood Al better than anyone, but that also meant he carried the responsibility of keeping the character consistent across hundreds of episodes. Ed's refusal to film that one scene shows something most fans never figured out. Al Bundy wasn't just a character written on a page. He was a careful balance between pathetic and sympathetic, crude and honest. And Ed fought to protect that balance even when it meant standing up to the people who created the show. The 1989 boycott campaign, led by Terry Raccolta, is one of the most famous controversies in TV history. But Ed O'Neill recently revealed what actually happened behind closed doors during that firestorm. While the public saw headlines about advertisers pulling out and Fox pulling episodes, the cast and crew were dealing with something far more intense: fear, confusion, and genuine uncertainty about whether the show would survive. Ed said the boycott hit harder than anyone expected. When major companies like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble withdrew their ads, Fox executives panicked. The network was still young, still fighting for legitimacy against ABC, CBS, and NBC, and losing revenue over a sitcom felt like a disaster. Ed recalled meetings where producers discussed toning down the content, cutting certain jokes, and possibly even overhauling the entire show to appease critics. The cast was caught in the middle. Ed admitted he didn't fully understand the scope of the backlash until reporters started showing up on set asking for his reaction. He said his first instinct was to defend the show, arguing that Married with Children was satire, not a moral guide. But the network told him to stay quiet, worried that any public comment would make things worse. Katie Sagal described that period as terrifying. She said there were genuine concerns the show would be canceled, and she'd be labeled as part of something controversial that ended her career before it really started. Christina Applegate, who was just 17 at the time, felt the pressure even more intensely. She became a focal point of criticism for playing Kelly Bundy, a character some people saw as promoting promiscuity to young viewers. Ed said watching Christina deal with that scrutiny made him angry, because she was still a kid being attacked by adults. What Ed revealed that most fans never knew is how the boycott actually changed the show's creative direction. After the controversy, the writers became more strategic. They didn't tone down the humor, but they became smarter about how they delivered it. Instead of being overtly sexual or crude, they leaned into wordplay, innuendo, and physical comedy that could slip past censors while still landing with audiences. Ed said this forced creativity actually made the show sharper. The most surprising outcome, Ed admitted, was how the boycott backfired spectacularly. Before Terry Ricolta's campaign, Married with Children was a modest hit. After the controversy, ratings exploded. People who had never heard of the show suddenly wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Ed said it was the greatest marketing campaign Fox never paid for, and it proved that in television, controversy sells. But Ed also acknowledged the darker side. The boycott left scars. Some advertisers never came back. Certain episodes were permanently altered or buried, and the cast lived under constant scrutiny for years. Ed said he learned an important lesson during that time. You can't please everyone, and trying to will destroy what makes you unique. One of the most painful moments during Married with Children's run happened off-screen, and Ed O'Neill recently admitted he wishes he'd handled it very differently. In 1991, Katie Sagal was pregnant, and the writers had written her pregnancy into the show's storyline. The Bundy family was going to have a new baby, and it seemed like a natural evolution for Peg and Al. But in her 7th month, Katie lost the baby, and everything changed. Ed said the tragedy hit the entire cast hard, but he struggled with how to support Katie. He didn't know what to say, didn't want to make things worse by saying the wrong thing, so he said very little. Looking back, he admitted that silence was a mistake. Katie was grieving, returning to a set where everyone knew what had happened, and she had to perform as Peg Bundy, a character whose entire identity was built on sarcasm and sexual teasing. Ed said he should have checked in more, should have been a better friend, but he let his own discomfort get in the way. The writers were forced to completely rewrite the storyline. The pregnancy arc was scrapped, and the episode that was supposed to introduce the new Bundy baby was turned into a dream sequence where Al imagined the whole thing. It was an awkward fix, but it allowed the show to move forward without forcing Katie to relive the loss on screen. Ed said filming that revised episode felt surreal because everyone knew why the change had been made, but nobody talked about it openly. Katie has since spoken about that period, saying it was the hardest time of her life. She appreciated the support from some cast members, but also felt isolated in her grief. Ed admitted hearing that years later made him feel guilty. He realized he'd prioritized keeping things professional over being emotionally present, and that was the wrong call. What Ed revealed that fans never figured out is how that tragedy changed the dynamic on set. The show became less about pushing boundaries and more about protecting each other. The cast grew closer in some ways, but there was also an unspoken understanding that certain topics were off-limits. Ed said that experience taught him that no matter how successful a show is, the people behind it are dealing with real life, real pain, and real struggles that don't disappear when the cameras start rolling. Ed's regret over how he handled Katie's loss is one of the few things he's been openly emotional about in interviews. He said if he could go back, he'd sit with her, listen, and let her know she wasn't alone. It's a reminder that even on a show as brash and unapologetic as Married with Children, the people behind the characters were vulnerable, human, and sometimes just trying to survive. Ed O'Neill has been asked countless times whether Married with Children could work today, and his answer is blunt: absolutely not. He doesn't say this with bitterness or nostalgia for the good old days. He says it as someone who understands how television, culture, and audience expectations have fundamentally changed. The show that made him famous wouldn't survive a single season in 2025, and Ed knows exactly why. The first reason is to cancel culture. Ed pointed out that Married with Children pushed boundaries that were already controversial in the 1980s and 90s. The sexual innuendo, the gender stereotypes, the politically incorrect jokes. All of it would be dissected, criticized, and amplified on social media within hours of airing. He said the show would be accused of promoting sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity, and advertisers would pull out before the first season even finished. Ed also mentioned that networks today are far more risk-averse than Fox was in 1987. Back then, Fox was a scrappy upstart willing to gamble on controversial content to differentiate itself from the major networks. Today, even streaming platforms that claim to push boundaries are cautious about content that could spark backlash. Ed said the fear of losing subscribers or facing boycotts makes it nearly impossible for a show like Married with Children to get greenlit in the first place. Another factor Ed highlighted is changing audience expectations. In the 1980s and 90s, people understood Married with Children was satire. Al Bundy wasn't meant to be a role model. He was a caricature, a comedic exaggeration of a frustrated working-class man. But Ed said today's audiences often struggle to separate satire from endorsement. If Al made a sexist joke, it would be interpreted as the show promoting sexism, even if the joke was meant to mock Al's ignorance. Ed also admitted the show's humor was rooted in a specific cultural moment that no longer exists. The idea of a shoe salesman trapped in a dead-end job with a lazy wife and ungrateful kids resonated in the late 20th century when economic frustration and family dysfunction were becoming mainstream topics. But today, that same premise would feel dated, and the jokes would land differently with audiences who have different cultural reference points. Despite all this, Ed doesn't think Married with Children's cancellation from modern television is necessarily a bad thing. He said the show existed in its time, did what it was supposed to do, and left a legacy that influenced countless other sitcoms. Trying to recreate it today would be pointless because the world has moved on. Ed's honesty about the show's limitations in a modern context shows he's not clinging to the past. He understands that what worked in 1987 doesn't work in 2025, and that's okay. One of the most unexpected revelations Ed O'Neill has shared is how playing Jay Pritchett in Modern Family completely changed the way he views Al Bundy. When Ed took the role in 2009, he was stepping back into the family sitcom genre after more than a decade away. But this time, instead of playing a bitter, defeated loser, he was playing a successful, confident, loving patriarch. The contrast couldn't have been more extreme, and Ed said it gave him a perspective on Al Bundy he never had while filming Married with Children. Ed admitted that for years after Married with Children ended, he struggled with how people saw him. Everywhere he went, fans called him Al, quoted his lines, and treated him like he was the character. It bothered him because Al Bundy was a cartoon, a one-dimensional caricature designed for laughs, and Ed wanted to be seen as an actor capable of more. Modern Family gave him that chance, and the success of Jay Pritchett proved he could carry a completely different kind of role. What surprised Ed was how much he enjoyed playing a father figure who actually cared about his family. Jay Pritchett wasn't perfect. He was gruff, old-fashioned, and sometimes clueless, but he genuinely loved his wife and kids. Ed said filming scenes where Jay expressed emotion or showed vulnerability felt freeing after spending 11 years playing a man who only showed affection through sarcasm or contempt. He realized just how dark and cynical Al Bundy really was, and it made him appreciate the nuance Modern Family allowed him to explore. Ed also revealed that Modern Family's success forced him to reassess Married with Children's legacy. While filming the newer show, younger cast members and crew would ask him about Al Bundy, and Ed noticed how differently they interpreted the character. Some saw Al as a tragic figure, a man beaten down by life who coped through humor. Others saw him as a product of his time, a relic of an era when that kind of humor was acceptable. Ed said hearing these perspectives made him realize Al Bundy meant different things to different generations, and that complexity was something he hadn't fully appreciated while making the show. Playing Jay also made Ed realize how much Al Bundy had limited his career. For over a decade after Married with Children ended, he was typecast. Directors saw him as the guy who played the crude shoe salesman, and they couldn't imagine him in dramatic or nuanced roles. Modern Family broke that perception, earning Ed multiple Emmy nominations and proving he had range. But Ed admitted there's a bittersweet irony. The role that made him famous also trapped him, and it took another sitcom to set him free. Ed's reflections on both characters show he's made peace with his legacy, but he's also honest about the challenges that came with it. Al Bundy will always be part of him, but Jay Pritchett proved there was more to Ed O'Neill than anyone realized. After decades of playing Al Bundy, starring in Modern Family, and watching Married with Children find new audiences through streaming, Ed O'Neill has finally shared his final thoughts on the Bundy legacy. What he wants fans to remember, what he regrets, and the one thing about the show that still surprises him. His reflections are honest, unfiltered, and reveal a man who's made peace with a role that defined his career but also complicated his life. Ed said the first thing he wants people to understand is that Married with Children was satire, not a blueprint for family life. He's frustrated that some viewers still take Al Bundy's attitude seriously, as if the show was endorsing his behavior. Ed emphasized that Al was a caricature, a comedic exaggeration meant to make people laugh at the absurdity of his worldview, not adopt it. He said if you watched the show and came away thinking Al was someone to admire, you completely missed the point. What Ed regrets most is how the show's success overshadowed the hard work of everyone involved. He said Katie Sagal, Christina Applegate, and David Faustino all delivered incredible performances that deserved more recognition. But because the show was controversial, it was never taken seriously by awards voters or critics. Ed admitted he benefited the most from the show's fame, and he wishes the rest of the cast had gotten more opportunities because of it. The one thing that still surprises Ed is how Married with Children continues to find new audiences. He said he assumed the show would fade into obscurity after it ended in 1997, remembered fondly by fans, but largely forgotten by mainstream culture. Instead, streaming platforms introduced the Bundys to younger generations who weren't even born when the show aired. Ed said he's amazed that teenagers and 20-somethings in 2025 are watching a sitcom from the 1980s and still finding it funny, even if they don't fully understand the cultural context. Ed also admitted he's surprised by how much the show influenced modern comedy. He pointed to shows like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Family Guy, and South Park, all of which push boundaries and use satire in ways Married with Children pioneered. Ed said the Bundys paved the way for darker, more cynical sitcoms, and that legacy is something he's proud of, even if he doesn't always agree with how far some shows have taken it. But Ed's most revealing admission is about his own relationship with Al Bundy. He said for years, he resented the character because it limited his career and defined how people saw him. But as time passed, he realized Al Bundy gave him something most actors never get, a role that became iconic, that people still talk about decades later, and that left a permanent mark on television history. Ed said he's made peace with that, and he's grateful, even if it took him years to get there. Ed O'Neill's revelations about Married with Children pull back the curtain on one of television's most controversial sitcoms, exposing truths that most fans never figured out. From the casting disasters that almost destroyed the show to the bitter feud with Amanda Beers, from the tragedy he wishes he'd handled differently to his honest belief that the Bundys could never survive today, Ed has finally shared the full story. These aren't sanitized, PR-friendly sound bites. They're raw admissions from someone who lived through the chaos, carried the weight of the show, and came out the other side with both pride and regret. What makes Ed's honesty so compelling is that he's not trying to rewrite history or protect his image. He admits his mistakes, acknowledges the show's limitations, and refuses to pretend Al Bundy was anything more than what it was: a crude, satirical character designed to make people laugh at the absurdity of his worldview. At the same time, Ed recognizes the show's impact, how it influenced modern comedy, broke sitcom conventions, and gave dignity to working-class frustration in a way few shows dared to attempt. The Bundy legacy is complicated, just like the man who played Al for 11 years. But Ed O'Neill's willingness to talk openly about what really happened behind the scenes proves one thing. Even decades later, Married with Children still matters, still sparks conversation, and still reveals new layers the more you look beneath the surface.